All right. So if you remember from last week, right, we were talking about divided government at the very end there, and we were talking about how, right, you get divided government. One, because states are kind of in control of the elections, and states are, right, can be kind of controlled by one political party that's been successful over a amount of time, like Texas is a Republican state or a red state, right? Has been for 25 years or whatever. And so there's a sorting that happens in the sense that, right, what comes out of Texas to go to the national level, right, they're going to be matching what's going on at the state level. So we're going to send Republican House members more, and depending upon where they come from, and a majority though, and Republican senators right up to the federal government. So that's what we're talking about there with the sorting. And as right, you've got this happening from state to state to state. Of course, you end up with the partisan groups at the federal level that are split. And right now, we're seeing right that the Democrats have control of the House of Representatives, the Senate is under the control of the Republicans, and the presidency, of course, is currently Republican. And so you're divided between the two parties. One part of the government's controlled by the Democrats, two other parts controlled by the Republicans. That, by its definition, is a divided government. So the sorting helps that happen. The voting, of course, helps that happen. And obviously, the coverage of the media, right, where it's talking about we're watching the horse races happen, who's going to win, who's going to be in charge. It's us always thinking about the breakdown between parties again, which helps as a cause for divided government. And then the gerrymandering that occurs at the state level. And gerrymandering is, right, the definition of gerrymandering is the intentional drawing of political boundaries, whether those be state boundaries, right, U.S. House boundaries at the state level, state House representative levels, state senator levels. You're drawing these boundaries intentionally to politically benefit one side over another. Right? That's what gerrymandering is. You draw these boundaries so that you can include people in them that will tilt that political district one way or the other. Gerrymandering is legal. Nothing illegal about it, as long as it's done based on political perspective, right? And what I have here on the slide that you're looking at now is an example of how we've done some gerrymandering in Texas. So this is looking at the red here is Travis County. Right, the little red boundary here is Travis County. And these are U.S. congressional House districts. And if you look back at 2003, right, you see this district here is District 10, House District 10. It was, right, being held by U.S. House of Representative member Lloyd Doggett, a Democrat. Republicans are in charge, right? They redraw the district, and they're like, you know what? We need to figure out what we can do to get Lloyd Doggett out of that seat. And if we change his district boundaries, right, and put more Republicans in his district than Democrats, then when the next election comes up, he'll lose. So, right, this red district was his, right? They redrew the boundaries. Now you got to remember, one of the requirements for a U.S. House of Representatives is you got to live in the district you're going to represent. So his home address, right, determines what district he's going to be in and running for office, and what one he's going to run for office from. He lives right here in this bottom southeast corner, right? So they redrew the district from this right here to this orange one, District 25. Again, he lives right here. So he stays in his district, but his district now, instead of being East Austin, is Southeast Austin, and this area here that goes out and down into Hays County. Guess who lives down in this area here? Republicans. Unfortunately for the Republicans, when they drew this boundary, they didn't do their job well enough. He won re-election. So they came back, and he lives here, and redrew his district again. And now his district is District 35, and it's this blue district. Now, what you can't tell from this clearly, but what I'll show you here is San Antonio is here. Right, so his district runs from Southeast Austin down I-35, that's this little thin strip here, and around the southeast and south side of San Antonio. So what they were doing here is putting even more Republicans in his district and putting Latino Republicans in his district because they had a person, Republicans did, a Latino, who was going to run for office, and they thought this will be the way to do it. So when they drew this district got challenged in court as being unconstitutional. They got challenged because they're saying, look, you drew this based on ethnicity, race or ethnicity, not just politics. And the federal court said, yep, that one's not good. You need to redo this. Now they've ignored the court and they haven't redone it. This is still what it looks like. But it's an unconstitutional district. And we've got 3 unconstitutional districts in Texas right now that the legislature hasn't seen taking time to fix. Now, we're not going to bother now because we're going through a census and we'll have new data and new distributions of people and stuff, and they come out in next year. So the legislature, Texas legislature, starting this winter, right in January, one of their issues will be to do the federally mandated redistricting based off the new Senate numbers, the new census numbers. But this is an example of redrawing all these boundaries to try to benefit your party. As long as you're doing it based on something like economics or political affiliation, something that's not a protected class, you can redraw these boundaries and try to set them up to help out your party over the other party. And so gerrymandering is another way that leads to divided government because you can, in a sense, program in results into districts by who you carve into those districts, right? So that's something that is a big game, basically, right? And if remember, there's let's see if I can get this over there real quick. Bring you over here to the Blackboard real quick. Down here is a link to a thing called the redistricting game. And this is a web page that lets you go practice gerrymandering, right? And putting people, redrawing lines to build districts. And so you can basically come over here and kind of learn how to do all this. Looks like it doesn't want to play. See if I can get it to show that page. It is not happy with me trying to show that page. Okay. This is the redistricting game. Y'all can see this now, right? I've kept trying to get there. So this is a website, and again, like I said, the link is on the Blackboard homepage. And this lets you go in here and try to do some redistricting. I don't know if yeah, it's not gonna, Blackboard won't let us play it, so I show it to you live. But if you're interested to see how you can do this, right? How redistricting works. This is a page that'll let you do that. And there's a link to it in the main page there. It's not there's no requirement there or anything, but if you're interested, it's one of those hands-on kind of things that'll let it make some sense. Okay. Really wish I could get it to hold the PowerPoint available in a second screen, but that's all right. All right, so the very last thing I want to talk about here, in Texas, the legislature does. That's a very good question. Each state decides how they're going to do their redistricting. So some use bipartisan commissions, some use nonpartisan commissions that are out, that are appointed and they take care of it and bring new maps back to be approved. Most states, though, use their state legislatures to do it. Texas is one of those. And so it'll be the job of the legislature to appoint members of the legislature to a committee to go out and work these maps and figure out what's going on and redraw them. And they'll redraw the U.S. House member districts. They'll redraw the Texas senatorial districts. They'll redraw the Texas House member districts. They'll redraw Texas State Board of Education districts. What else? There's a bunch of little districts out there that they'll redraw, and so all of them are based upon a larger or smaller, in Texas case, is a larger population of residents and figuring out where they are and trying to balance the people in those residences. Remember, at the very beginning of the semester, we talked about ensuring that we have one person, one vote, equality in voting. And the way you do that in a representative system is that you ensure that each district that elects somebody, when you compare those districts to one another, they have the same number of folks in them, right? And so you use the census as your base counting of where people are in the state. And then you redraw boundaries around where the people are. So if there's a whole bunch of folks that moved out of West Texas into Central Texas, or people that moved from New York or California to Texas, right, wherever they settled and lived is going to change the balance of the population in the state. And so we have to redraw the lines so that each district has about the same number of people in it, so that the representatives coming out of those districts have the same political power. They're representing the same number of people. The gerrymandering allows us to tilt it to one party's favor or another based upon how we draw those lines. And since we use the legislature in Texas as the decision-making body there, of course, with a Republican majority in the Texas legislature, they're going to draw those lines to benefit them as much as possible. Texas has its own set of rules and parameters that it follows. First and foremost is to try to get the districts to have the same number of people in them. One of the other ones is they try to follow established political boundaries like city limits or county limits, county districts, right? County boundaries. They try to follow those natural things that are already there, because those help provide cohesive communities of people that already identify the same, right? They live in Pflugerville, they live in Round Rock, they live in Williamson County, right? So they try to follow those kind of things where they can, and try not to vary too much from that. But you get to an area like Houston, where you've got millions and millions of people, you're going to have 15 districts in Houston, and you're going to be breaking it down based on blocks, city blocks, right? So there's a lot that goes into it, but there are some rules laid out by each of the states. The federal government's rules are basically have the same number of people in them as close as you can. Not perfect, but pretty close. Don't divide those groups up based on protected classes like race, um, gender, right? Something like that. Some of those protected classes, but political affiliation, economics, and education, those are all certainly eligible to be used as parameters, right? If you want to, here's all these rich people here, put them in a group, put the poor people in a group, you can do some of that, right? Um, and that may benefit both of those groups doing something like that because they'll have the same kind of concerns. But it varies from state to state because there's a lot of state laws that come into play there. Okay, so the last bit here to think about, this is a theoretical issue for political parties, is how do we want parties to work? We talked earlier about a model called the rational party model, which is how a party needs to work to be effective or successful in winning elections. And that's one perspective, right? If you want to say, if your assumption is, parties should be trying to win, so they should work this way. But we could ask another question. The question we could ask is, right, these parties are here to work in a democratic model, a democratic kind of government. What does democracy need from political parties as participants in this political process? And this is, I think, a very important question because it goes back to the whole reason parties spring up to begin with. And parties spring up because, right, we want to have groups get into government and control government. And we want, right, to be able to, as individuals, come together in a group and have that kind of impact. So, equal representation, you want equal representation from your district drawing, right? You want to make sure that all of the districts have the equal number of people in them. Political parties are exactly contrary to equal representation. A political party wants to win. A political party wants to get their ideas in government. They want to control government. Now, from the responsible party model, what the democracy needs, we need representation. If democracy is going to work right, we need representation that is effective representation and is accurate representation. If, let's take the presidential election numbers, right? 74 million people voted Democrat, 70 million people voted Republican. Do we want to have equal representation between the two parties, or do you want that representation to accurately reflect what the voting is? If it accurately reflects it, we'll have more Democrats. They had 74 million votes. Then we have Republicans because they only had 70, right? So equal representation is not necessarily what we're after. We're looking for solid, accurate representation. And we want those parties, once they get into government, to represent what we voted for the candidates there, right, in that party to do. Right, so think about this. A political party says, here's who we are. Right? We're Republicans and we believe ABC, or we're Democrats and we believe 1, 2, 3. And if you elect any of us that call ourselves Democrats to office, we're going to try to do 1, 2, 3. And the same for Republicans, right? Whoever you represent, you elect, that's what we're going to take with us. So the parties need to tell us who they are and what they stand for, right? When I pulled up last week the political parties, right, the platforms, right, that was them doing that, right? They were giving us a program, right, saying to be a Democrat means to be concerned about these things, and here's the list of things we want to work on. And to be a Republican means you believe these kind of things. Here are the things we're going to work on. So the parties have to, if this is going to be a what democracy needs kind of question, a responsible political party that's going to work for a strong democracy needs to, one, tell us who they are and what they're going to do. If we elect a Republican, what does that get us in government? If we elect a Democrat or a Green or an Independent, what does that get us in government? Once a party has kind of identified themselves and what's important to them and what their goals are, then the candidates from that party need to reflect that same program, right? This is a problem that the Republican Party has been having now for a while because Donald Trump, the representative of the Republican platform here as president, doesn't, right, quite often reflect what the Republican Party has stood for a while. And so much so that in this last presidential election period, the Republican Party just said, we're whatever Trump wants us to be, right? I mean, they didn't even change their platform from 2016. And really, they should be telling us to be a Republican means to believe these things. And therefore, any candidate that calls themselves a Republican, right, says, I believe those things. And the same thing with any other party. Because what that does is it gives us very important cues as voters when we look at a ballot and we see maybe someone we're not familiar with on that ballot, but we see a D or an R, right, by their name, and then we go, well, I know what it means to be a Democrat. I know what it means to be a Republican. I know what they stand for. So this candidate, by identifying that, tells me that they believe those same things, or at least most of them. So the party should lay that out clearly and comprehensively, and they should make sure that their candidates are pushing those same message. Those are the first two things that we would require from parties if we were going to be looking after democracy as a whole, or from this responsible party model. The next two things are what happens after those parties and their candidates are elected to office. Let's assume, right, we're talking about the U.S. in a majoritarian system with a two-party setup. So really, you're going to have a majority party get elected to office and a minority party. And the majority party is simply the party that has the most of that party, right, in it. So in the House right now, the majority party is the Democratic Party. In the Senate, the majority party is the Republican Party. What they should be doing as they try to get things done in government is get their platform, their program, right, turned into legislation. They need to implement what they said they were going to do when they were running for office. If those candidates said, you vote for me and this is what I'll do when I get there. Okay, you're there now. For this to work right, we need that representation to hold, right? We need you as an elected member of a political party to bring those issues you ran on to government and try to implement them. The minority members of government need to, right, take their issues with them as well, right? Say, okay, we're not in the majority, we're in the minority, but here's the alternative. Here's an option that you could do instead of that might work better, right? Let's talk about this. Let's have these debates and discussions. Assuming the majority party does, right, exercise their majority and put their programs into place, at the end of the day, the party needs to be, right, they need to own what they did or didn't do. Then the minority party needs to ensure that that ownership is placed solidly on their shoulders, right, by telling us, hey, remember when they said they were going to run for office and you elected them, they promised these things. And they haven't done it. Maybe you ought to look at us. Right? And the majority party needs to be saying, hey, we promised you would do this. Here's us doing that. We've been a good party, right? Our members have done what they promised. You need to reelect us. What that does is it allows us voters to know what issues are important, ones that we can vote for, whether they got worked on. Did the government, right, and the majority party, the minority party fulfill their part? And should we vote for them again, right? We can look out there and see all that. So, right, if you're running, like we just had this presidential election, right, you're Trump, you're running for reelection, right? If this model is working, the Republicans and Trump as a Republican should all be saying, here's what we said we would do when you elected us to office. Here are the things we got done. Here's what we didn't get done, but if you send us back, we'll do better because of these reasons, right? We're closer to getting. So they need to run on that record. They need to be responsible for the record that they put into play. They need to be held responsible by us, the voters. But this is what democracy needs. When you're going to have a system of parties running against each other, parties supporting and candidates and helping candidates win elections, we need to know what the parties stand for, what the candidates are going to do in office, and then hold them responsible for that. That makes sense? Any questions about political parties before we move to interest groups? Okay, if you remember when we started political parties, the chapter on political parties, I gave you a definition of what a political party was, and I contrasted that with the definition of interest groups because they were so close to one another. And I needed you to be able to keep those apart in your mind. So we're going back to that here, right? An interest group is an organization of people that have similar policy goals. And they get into the political process to try to achieve those goals, right? So an interest group, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, is interested in legislation that's going to, right, deter, stop, whatever, fix something that has to do with drunk driving so that roads are safer, right, and less drunk drivers are out there. That's their policy goal that they're after is ways to make the roads safer from drunk drivers. Anything that would fall under that is something they're probably interested in, and they want to achieve that, whether that's uh, stopping people, having checkpoints on the road to stop people, a whole group of people one after another to see if they're drunk, whether that's tougher penalties for drunk driving, whether that's higher ages to be able to purchase alcohol, whatever it is, right? All of them are going to the same kind of policy goal. They only get involved in the political process to try to reach those goals. They don't care who they're dealing with, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, Greens, Independents. Those folks that are elected to office are really unimportant to them from the interest group perspective. They just want to get what they want. And so in that sense, they're focused on a set of policies, right? They are what we call policy specialists. You go to the Mothers Against Drunk Drivers meeting and ask them what they think about agricultural processes in Texas, they're going to go, that's not our issue. Go talk to somebody else, right? And that's, right, the main focus of an interest group is to get policy that they want passed into law from the political organizations, whether it's national or state or whatever they're trying to deal with. And that's very different than a political party who's trying to get their members of that political party elected to office to control government. When they control government, they will deliver the policy they want. That's where the two are the same, but they go about it in a completely different manner. So political parties are what we call policy generalists, right? They have, remember the party platforms I showed you, hundreds of pages of ideas and beliefs about what they're going to try to do in different policies and where they're going. You go to an interest group, it's not going to be that spread out. They're going to be a lot more focused. They're policy specialists. What they are trying to do, their primary goal as an interest group, is to change policy to what they want or preserve policy in government if they already have what they want. What was the primary goal of a political party? Everybody remember what the primary goal of a political party was? win elections, right? Completely different goals. Now, interest groups focused on getting the policy they want. That's their primary goal. Notice they have a secondary goal here, something else that they do. That's change social values or change the political agenda. Now, secondary goals are really only goals for interest groups when they're failing generally to meet their primary goal, right? An interest group gets out there, they're going to try and get policy that they want made into law. They go, right, talk to the state government or the federal government, whoever, to try to get that enacted. If they're successful, great, they got what they wanted. But if they fail, they're probably going to fail because they haven't marshaled enough support behind their issue to make government pay attention to them and to choose their policy. So a lot of times when interest groups fail to achieve the policy goals that they want, their primary goal, they take a second look at themselves and go, we got to get bigger, we got to get more influence, we got to get more effective in delivering our message. And that means changing people's minds outside of government, changing what people value, changing what people think, getting more people on their side. That's the secondary goal, changing social values. So those are the two things you see these groups get into most of the time, right? Trying to get their policy. They can't get it, then they try to get more people so they can then go back and get their primary goal, which is changing policy. Does that make sense? Anybody here a member of an interest group? Don't usually get very many that hit on that. You're a mom. So is there an interest group of moms out there? There probably is. Right? I'm not aware of one off the top of my head. We see political actions based upon momness, right? The Million Mom Marches, things like that. But the policies are different between them sometimes. If you were a mom, if you were right that joined Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, that would get you one, right? Yeah, absolutely, you do, right? Those are all things that a lot of people, not just moms, care about, but moms do especially care about those things because moms have kids, right? And these are threats to their children, so that makes a lot of sense, right? So you have to distinguish between, are you getting involved in politics or policy based because you're a mom or because you're a parent? That'd be a little different, right? Different perspective. Might go the same direction, might not. If anybody is a member of an environmental group or just Facebook arguments, yeah, I know, right? Best place in the world to go for arguments, right? If you're a member of, say, a gun control group or a gun rights Second Amendment group or something like that, right? Those would be interest groups. There's probably some Texans that are Second Amendment, NRA, something like that, or so. I'm getting up there in years. One of the interest groups that interests me is AARP, which is the American Association of Retired People. Right, that's an interest group. Right, there are a lot of public policies, right, that are being made that affect people because of their age. Health insurance, right? Medicare, Social Security. There's all kinds of things, right? That investments and how you can make investments at different stages of your life. These are all things that an interest group organized around retired people, because that's nicer than saying old people, right? Retired people. These are all interests that they have in common, and so as a group, right, they would be working in government, going and talking to folks in government to make sure that policies that impact that group are favorable to them. And so we'll pull some of these out and talk about them as we move through I'll probably pull up AARP because it's got a lot of good examples in it of a lot of different things. But first, let's talk about where interest groups come from, how they spring up, right? And we've got two big ideas about the formation of interest groups, how they come to be. One, the disturbance theory, which shockingly theorizes the disturbance of some time causes their growth, and the entrepreneurial theory, which we'll tease out as we go through it, right? So let's talk about this. This first one is pretty easy to understand. The disturbance theory says interest groups form because something has happened that a group of people don't like, or that has affected them in some way that brings them together as a group. There's something, right, making their word, yes, absolutely, BLM, right, is an example, a perfect example of a disturbance, a social disturbance, creating an interest group, right? Black folks, right, perceiving, as I try to take a middle line here on this, perceiving that they are being treated unfairly by city governments and police in particular. Well, that's right, something that will motivate folks. Look, you're treating us different, and that's not right, and that needs to be fixed. And not only you're not treating us different, people are dying because of the way they're being treated. That really motivates people, and it should. Right? And it should. So the formation of a group to organize those feelings, to organize those people, to then try to push for change is exactly what a disturbance theory formation posits will happen. Something out there in the world has changed. A group of folks are right affected by it positively or negatively. Right, it could be either way. But it drives them to organize, and it drives them to engage government to try to get policy that they want. So that could be anything as far as right, Black Lives Matter, COVID, right? The mask wearing that's coming with COVID, right? Any of these kind of things, right? Depression, recession, right? Folks just losing their jobs because of COVID, right? Maybe they organized to get right focus on job and job benefits, and they're not focused on the COVID issue so much, right? Whatever the case may be, right? As I've got technology up here, right, under Division of Labor. We've been looking at and thinking about what's going to happen with the labor market as we automate more and more and more. Right, as robots do more work, less people might be needed to do work. Well, that's going to be a problem moving forward if that's true, right? If people are losing their jobs to machines, they're going to have something to say about it. And they already do, right? So anything like that can initiate a public outcry and a political focus and lead to the development of an interest group, right? Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, exactly like that, right? A mother lost her child to a drunk driver. One mother started that whole thing, right? Now it's worldwide. But there was obviously a reservoir of plenty of parents and especially mothers out there that had lost children to drunk drivers that when this group started to form, they're like, I want in on that. And I want to have a say. I want to make a difference there. We felt that pain too. So that's one theory of where interest groups come from. I mean, that's easy to understand and easy to see. Entrepreneurial theory is a little different. First, you have to understand what an entrepreneur is, right? And that's someone that sees an opportunity, maybe to make a difference for others, maybe to make a difference for themselves, to build something that they can be in charge of or in control of, right? To play a part in something that gives them a career or a perspective or a livelihood. Notice this isn't generally just something's gone out of whack, something's gone bad, but it's somebody looking out there and recognizing an opportunity. Most interest groups are formed from business focuses, right? You go out and look at all the registered interest groups that are working state governments and federal governments, most of them track back to a business interest. There's not a social disturbance there. Right? This is people trying to make money, trying to get a favorable environment to their product or their process or whatever it is. And they understand that government plays a part of that. And they, as a group, people that work in that area, should be working with government to try to be successful. Yes, the NRA is an interest group, right? The National Rifle Association is organized around it. It was initially put together, it was organized around a couple of ideas. First, it was a gun safety organization and a hunting safety organization. And so if you go back far enough, you'll see that the NRA, when I was in junior high, so it was, this is Stone Age, but when I was in junior high, I took a hunting safety course in my junior high, sponsored by the National Rifle Association, right? Booklets and stuff that they had worked up and published and given to the schools. And then we took classes and learned about gun safety and hunting, and that was where they were focused. Now, since that time, they've shifted away from. I'm sure there's still some gun safety involved, but their main focus now is ensuring that government has from their perspective, proper perspective on what the Second Amendment means, right, and preserving access to guns as an individual right in the U.S. based upon the Second Amendment of the Constitution. They've evolved over time. That's become their primary focus. But it used to only be one of the things that they looked at. But yes, they're an interest group. And all of the members, all the people that join that, right, pay money. They can be, right? There's nothing that prevents a religious organization from building an interest group. And because government policy will affect them, right, in some form or fashion over time. And so, yes, they can certainly be involved in politics that way, right? Build an organization, especially, if it's I'll call it a pan theistic religious organization. In other words, one that would encompass maybe more than just one religious perspective, right? One denomination. You'll see that a lot. It doesn't preclude the other one, but I mean, usually you'll see interest groups are a little broader than just that. But yeah, if there's policy that the government may make that could impact a group of people, then that's a group of people that might see fit to organize an interest group. And the entrepreneurial theory says that people are looking for these opportunities, right? They're looking for a place where, hey, if I do a little bit of legwork here, I can build this organization and it can make a difference and it might help my business and maybe I'll play an important part in this organization. So I'll get something out of that. It's much more focused on, what you want and need, not necessarily motivation from a huge upset, right? A huge disturbance. So it's, again, most of our interest groups are business oriented. They are amalgamations of businesses that come together and form an association. You'll see like the American Petroleum Manufacturer Association, right? Think about who would be in that, right? Petroleum manufacturers. They have an interest group. It's not enough that Exxon's already one of the biggest companies in the world that's making billions of dollars, right? They're organizing themselves with all of the other petroleum companies into one interest group, right, that goes to the federal government and says, hey, we would like to see policy that helps our business interest. Oh, and by the way, we represent 15% of the national gross income, so product. So it'd be a good thing if you looked our way, right? Most interest groups are based around that kind of perspective, and that's entrepreneurial, right? And that's what representative government's all about. right? A Republican democracy is about giving groups and people access to the government so they can get their interest resolved and policies that they want in government. Interest groups are the way you organize people to get involved in that decision-making process. And they're all over the place, right? They're all over the place. Does this make sense? So let's talk about how they do their job, right? I've been telling you that interest groups, right, are trying to get involved in the government to get the policies that they want. They do that, generally speaking, in four ways. They lobby, they electioneer, they litigate, and they go public. We'll talk about each of these individually. We'll start with lobbying. This is what we think of most of the time when we think of what an interest group is doing, right? Lobbying is simply the reaching out, discussion, communication from an interest group member to a member of government, to a policymaker of some kind, trying to get them to do what the interest group wants. That policymaker could be an elected representative that's going to pass new legislation. That policymaker could be a member of the bureaucracy that's going to do a rule interpretation of legislation, decide this law means this, and here's how we're going to make it work. Right? Any place where an interest group is going to try to reach out and provide a perspective or information or reason for government to do A versus B, right, would be a prime case for lobbying. Now, the idea of the definition of, the term lobbying comes from, right, just referring to how you did this work initially, right? When you first really started doing this, we've seen interest groups grow up. Members of those organizations hung out in the lobbies of government, right? The big, like in the Capitol or whatever. They stand out in the lobby and wait for decision makers to come out and then try to talk to them. So they were lobbying, standing in the lobby. What it comes to mean, right, is any of the communication process where you would address a member of government to try to get what you want. These interest groups are well organized, they're well designed. They actually have people who are hired to do this job, this communication job. They are called lobbyists, right? It is a cool job to get if you like to talk and you like to interact with government. You try to make things happen. Being a paid lobbyist, I think, is probably a very interesting job. Right? You take your group's perspective and you go into government and try and convince them to do what your group wants. Tell them why and show them why it'd be a good thing, right? Try to influence them one way or the other. So, you want that job? It's a good job, and they pay well if you can get them. If you want to watch a both interesting and I found it darkly funny movie about interest groups and lobbying, I would recommend Thank You for Smoking. You may have seen it, I don't know, but that's a job about lobbying. The main character in that movie is a tobacco lobbyist. So his job is to go to governments to convince them, right, that smoking is a good thing. And it's Hollywoodish. It's not horribly perfectly accurate, but it gives you a real good flavor of what really goes on. So I guarantee it's entertaining as well as educational in a sense. Most of the time, it's not going to be nearly as entertaining, right? You're going to be working on policy, right? Decision making. You're going to be right talking about this law needs to change just this little bit right here so that it works better for us. So being a lobbyist is a position that requires you to know your topic perfectly and then be able to take that topic and explain it and convince people that your position is a good position. and that's your job. Now, the big part of this is that, and we don't think about it this way, but we need to be aware of this, is that the decision makers in government are always looking for more information. They, right, thrive on good information so that they can make good decisions about policy. We elect someone to go up to the federal government and represent us in the House or the Senate, and they're going to be asked to vote on thousands of pieces of legislation from a lot of different focuses, and they may not be an expert on any of them. The bill comes forward and they're trying to decide how to vote. How's this going to impact my constituents in Texas? It's really, really useful if they've got a policy specialist that can come into their office and talk to them about, here's what the law says, that's the way it's written, here's what that means, here's how it's going to impact your people, here's why you want to vote for it. And then when that person leaves and you, as a decision maker, you've heard their spiel and you've been provided a bunch of information from one side of the perspective, a lobbyist from the other side comes in and says, here's what this legislation means. It's a horrible thing. It would be bad for your folks. You don't want to vote for it. And here's why, right? Now, as a decision maker, if I get lobbyists from multiple organizations coming in and bringing me all that information, even though I know it's biased information, that communication is invaluable because I don't have the time nor the staff to do the deep dive research that's needed on each piece of legislation going forward. So in a large sense, I'm going to rely on interest groups to bring me the best case from their perspective, right, on all of these issues, and then let me as a decision maker weigh those arguments, weigh what I know about the people I'm representing, weigh what I think is good for the country, and then make a decision on that legislation. So interest groups provide, right, a really, really important role here in educating our policymakers in sometimes very tedious and very technical areas of law that they just can't be expected to know, right? Just can't. And they don't have the time or the resources to become experts themselves. So interest groups provide those experts in providing lobbyists that come in and speak to that. So you'll have the American Medical Association will send doctors, right, to talk from their perspective. You'll have the nursing associations and the hospital associations and the insurance groups, right? All of them are sending lobbyists around maybe one piece of legislation that's going to impact all of them. And they're going to be, right, interest groups for patients. And they're all going to be sending their top, most influential, most educated folks about this issue to talk to people in the government and tell them, here's what you need to do, which is a great thing, right? We need that because otherwise you're not going to get that kind of information. And then it's their job as decision makers to sort through it and sift through it and figure out what makes sense and what to vote for. So this lobbying perspective is incredibly important, right? One, it gets the information from the interest group about what they want and need in front of decision makers. But on the back end, it's providing decision makers with, right, the best possible information, biased, certainly, but best possible information that they could get quickly on point about that legislation. Now, one of the things that we always have to concern ourselves with here is, are lobbyists going to lie when they deliver this information? Is a lobbyist going to come into a congressperson and say, hey, you need to vote for this because if you don't, it's going to blow this up, right? And that's, if that's not true, right, we don't want our legislators relying on that untrue information. But if you think a little bit about this process, could a lobbyist do that? And the answer is there's nothing that prevents them from doing it. Yes, they could. They could come in with a completely non-factual, biased argument and convince legislators to support that position. What you got to remember, of course, is that their opposition is going to be coming in as well. And if I'm a legislator, I'm saying, well, okay, thanks, Jill. You've told me, right, why I should vote for yours. But I was just talking to Bob from your opposition over here. And Bob told me, well, what's Jill going to do? Jill's going to throw down the facts, right? Jill's going to, if Bob lied to me and gave me a smoke screen, Jill's right, an expert from the other side of the table. She's going to be able to show me exactly what that smoke screen is and why Bob lied to me. And as a legislator, am I going to listen to Bob next time? When I was just made to look like a fool in front of Jill and she showed me hard facts? No, Bob doesn't get into my office anymore, right? So a lobbyist, right, has to be careful, even when they are delivering biased information, and they should. That's their job. They're supposed to convince somebody that their position is right. They need to make sure that bias that they bring in their argument is supportable, that it makes sense, that it's something that, as a decision maker, I could rely on in public and not have to worry about, right, that I just made a fool of myself, but you made a fool of me, right? So there's a natural constraint there. The other part of it, of course, is that, this is not going to be the last time as an interest group lobbyist you want to talk to those decision makers, right? If you don't get what you want this time, you're going to come back again. And if you do get what you want this time, you're going to come back the next time somebody's making a challenge to what you want to try to preserve it, to try to stop that change. So interest group lobbyists have to, right, bring their best argument that's supportable, right, and present that. And that's a good thing for the system. It's a good thing for democracy that we get that kind of information into the system. Does that make sense? Any questions about lobbying? We got some more to go on that. I guess I might as well. We got a couple minutes. We can go ahead and start that. So, Andrea, this is for you, right? This first blurb here about how to lobby. At the federal level and state level, in every state that I'm aware of, requires lobbyists, right, representatives from interest groups, to register as lobbyists with the government, right? So, right, and I'm experienced with lobbyists from the state right here in Texas, and so what they do is they're required before legislative session starts, which would be right now. Lobbyists from interest groups, if they're new lobbyists, are having to go down to the Capitol and fill out paperwork saying, "Hi, I'm so and so. I work for this interest group. I am a paid lobbyist. Right? This is my job." The money is all over this. Um, so that lobbyist is putting everybody that's a government official on notice that they're a paid advocate for a political position. And that's necessary because we're also going to have a lot of people down there in the legislature talking to Congress folks that are, right, voters, that's their representative, and they're just citizens. They're not lobbyists, and they're down there saying, "Me as a citizen wants X," and you're allowed to do that, right? There's nothing wrong with that. That's you're not a lobbyist, but you're doing the same kind of thing, but you're representing yourself, not an organization. So a lobbyist is representing an organization, got to register so that the Congress folks know who they're talking to, staff know who they're talking to. A money situation. If you mean how much money do interest groups put into politics, the answer is more than we could ever imagine. Right? Because money is important in the political system. Everything that gets done requires money. Every candidate that's in office is going to have to run for re-election, and they certainly love to see people make donations to their political campaigns. Interest groups, right, to do their job have to raise a lot of money, not just to support candidates running for office, but just to get their message out there, right, to organize their group, to bring members in, to put out, right, bulletins and work, information about who they are and what they want. advertisements on TV, radio, magazines, right? All of that's right, takes money. And so big organizations are spending millions and millions of dollars, right, running the lobby part of their organization. So it's tons of money. Okay, we'll stop right here.